Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. DarXnights. I know many of you use these videos to relax or fall asleep, so before you drift off, leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying these stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let's get comfortable and begin. Story 1. Room 405 was supposed to be just another overnight stop for a tired businessman. But by morning, he was gone, without a trace. No struggle, no screams, no signs of forced entry. Just a half-empty cup of coffee, an open journal, and a single chilling sentence: "He's already here." What happened in that room has haunted investigators for decades, and tonight, you're about to hear the case that refuses to die. Richard Michael Hale wasn't the kind of man who left things to chance. At 38, he had built a reputation as a meticulous consultant in corporate logistics, the kind of professional whose planner was updated to the minute. He traveled often, always alone, always by schedule. His clients respected him, not because he was warm or personable, but because he was dependable. He arrived when he said he would. He delivered what he promised. He stayed in modest business-class motels, dined conservatively, kept receipts. There were no sudden moves in Richard Hale's life, until the night he checked into room 405. On October 21, 1997, Richard was on his way back from a week-long corporate review in Indianapolis. He had logged 200 miles that day before pulling off Interstate 65 just past midnight. The motel he selected was a simple, low-slung building, a two-story brick structure tucked beside a dark stretch of highway, just outside a town barely marked on the map. He had no reservation. None was needed. This wasn't peak tourist season, and the motel rarely filled more than a third of its rooms. The night clerk, an aging man with a cigarette tucked behind one ear, noted nothing unusual about the late-night guest, except, perhaps, the fact that he kept glancing over his shoulder, like he expected someone to be following him. Richard asked for a room on the top floor, specifically one facing the back of the property, away from the highway. Room 405. He signed the logbook in neat cursive, paid in cash, and didn't speak more than a few words. The clerk, later questioned by investigators, said Richard appeared tired but alert, more tense than most guests, but not enough to raise concern. No luggage cart, no extra bags. Just a slim black briefcase and a navy blue overcoat. The room itself was unremarkable. A queen-sized bed. A scuffed desk. Faded wallpaper peeling at the corners. A coffee maker humming faintly on the counter. Room 405 was one of the older units, rarely requested, not because it was dangerous or cursed, those would be myths tacked on later, but because it was forgettable. Even the cleaning staff tended to overlook it. But Richard had chosen it with intention. That much would become clear in hindsight. Earlier that same evening, around 7:30 p.m., he had made a phone call to his assistant, Sandra Lentz. His voice, she later said, had sounded clipped and anxious, more so than usual. He asked her to cancel his remaining meetings for the week, citing exhaustion. He also instructed her to clear his upcoming travel itinerary entirely. When she questioned the sudden change, he told her not to worry. Just needed to rest somewhere quiet, he had said. Sandra noted a strange pause in his voice before he added, "I don't think he'll follow me here." She never thought to ask who he was. At the time, she assumed it was a personal matter, perhaps a tense breakup or some legal trouble. Richard didn't talk about his personal life. In fact, no one in the office knew much about him at all. At 9:47 p.m., the motel's CCTV system, which consisted of a single outdated camera mounted above the front desk, recorded Richard's entrance. The black-and-white footage showed him entering through the front door, nodding briefly to the clerk, and climbing the stairs to the second floor. He held his briefcase tightly, never letting it dangle or rest against his side. Even in grainy footage, there was something guarded about the way he moved, like he was bracing for impact. 10 minutes later, the same camera caught him walking down the hallway toward room 405. He unlocked the door, entered, and closed it softly behind him. That was the last visual confirmation of Richard Michael Hale alive. What happened after remains a mystery. There were no further entries or exits logged on camera. No room service was called. No lights were reported on. And yet, sometime between that final hallway footage and 11 a.m. the next morning, Richard Hale disappeared without a sound, without a struggle, and without a single clear clue. The strange part was not just that he vanished. It was that everything he left behind remained perfectly still, as if paused in the middle of motion. The room, when eventually opened, appeared untouched, save for the coffee cup, still half full and faintly warm, and the journal he had brought with him, left open on the desk, mid-thought. There was no sign of panic, no rushed escape. Just a man who had somehow evaporated into thin air, leaving behind a sentence that would become the center of an enduring mystery. He's already here. The motel surveillance system was outdated even by 1997 standards. A single black and white camera covered the hallway where room 405 was located, looping its footage every 12 hours unless manually backed up. The recording captured long stretches of silence, dim lights humming over threadbare carpet, and the occasional guest stumbling in or out of their rooms. It wasn't built for clarity. Most faces appeared washed out, bodies reduced to shapes gliding through static. But that grainy footage would become the most scrutinized piece of evidence in investigation, not because of what it revealed, but because of what it failed to explain. At 10:04 p.m., Richard was seen entering the hallway, carrying his briefcase. His pace was steady but cautious. He paused briefly outside room 405 before unlocking the door and stepping inside. The door closed gently behind him. Then silence. Over the next 2 hours, the camera recorded nothing unusual. No shadows, no movements, no signs of life from behind the closed door. Then came 11:52 p.m. At that exact moment, the audio on the recording, though muffled and distorted, picked up what sounded like a single, deliberate footstep. One soft tap on the carpeted hallway floor, directly in front of room 405. There was no corresponding video movement. No figure passed through the hallway. Nothing appeared to enter or exit. Just the sound. One footfall. Then nothing. Investigators later combed through every second of the footage. They slowed it down, enhanced it frame by frame, trying to catch any flicker of motion, any blur that might suggest someone had passed by too quickly to be seen. But the hallway remained visually empty. That lone footstep was the only trace. It was as if something had been there, but didn't want to be seen. What made the detail even more unsettling was what came next, or rather, what didn't. Richard never left room 405. At no point after 10:04 p.m. did the door open again. No other guests walked by. The room remained dark and undisturbed. And yet, by morning, Richard was gone. It was as though the footstep marked the moment he was no longer alone. The housekeeper, Maria Leclerc, was the first to notice something wrong. She knocked on the door of room 405 shortly after 11 a.m., expecting the usual delayed checkout. When there was no answer, she used her passkey to enter. The bed was untouched. The bathroom unused. A single coffee cup sat on the table, half full. The television was off. The only sign of life was a leather-bound journal lying open on the desk. The words written on the last page were hurried, almost scrawled, "He's already here." The motel manager reviewed the tape immediately. What he saw disturbed him enough to call the police within minutes. There were no exit recordings. No signs of forced entry or disturbance. Just the sound of a single footstep and then silence. That was the last known trace of Richard Hale. There were theories, of course. Some speculated he had slipped out through the back window. But the room faced an overgrown ravine bordered by a rusted iron fence, a 15-foot drop with no footprints in the dirt below. Others wondered if he had staged his disappearance. Faked it somehow. But that idea unraveled quickly. His ID, wallet, car keys, and suitcase were untouched. Only his briefcase was gone. Detectives questioned every guest on the top floor that night. No one reported hearing anything strange. No thumps, no shouting, No signs of movement in the hallway except for the faint, eerie footstep caught on tape. Some didn't even believe the sound was real, claiming it might have been electrical interference or the result of aging tape. But audio experts confirmed the frequency and signature were consistent with an actual footstep, carpeted, light, deliberate. The timing of it all felt too precise to ignore. Even stranger was the journal. Investigators noted that the entries from earlier days read like the thoughts of a man unraveling. In the week leading up to his disappearance, Richard had written cryptic sentences that hinted at paranoia. Mentions of being watched, of seeing the same figure in different cities, of knowing, somehow, that something had followed him from Chicago to Indianapolis, and now to this roadside motel. He didn't name anyone. He didn't explain what he meant. But one passage stood out. 3 days before he vanished, he had written, "If I stay still, maybe it won't know I see it. But I think it already knows. And now it's waiting." To many, it sounded like the delusion of an exhausted man. But combined with the footstep and the fact that no one ever saw Richard again, the entry took on a darker tone. It didn't feel like a breakdown. It felt like a warning. A record of someone being hunted by something they couldn't escape, not because they were running from it, but because it had already arrived. In the years that followed, Room 405 would be sealed off, no longer available for guests. The tape remains locked in evidence storage, still played by amateur sleuths and internet theorists who believe that footstep wasn't human. That maybe the last sound Richard Hale ever heard was the sound of something stepping closer. Something no one else could see. In the weeks following Richard Hale's disappearance, the investigation shifted into a deeper and more obsessive phase. Detectives scoured his background, reaching into every aspect of his personal and professional life for signs of instability, conflict, or motive to vanish. Nothing pointed to foul play, but nothing supported voluntary disappearance either. His bank accounts remained untouched. His phone activity ceased after 10:02 p.m., the last outgoing call to a number that turned out to be disconnected. Every trace of him simply stopped at room 405. That's when the focus turned to the briefcase. It was the only item missing from the room, and it wasn't listed among his personal effects when he checked in. According to his assistant, Richard always carried that briefcase. It was a battered brown leather model he'd owned for over a decade. He never let it out of sight. Not in meetings, not during flights, not even while dining. Colleagues often joked that it probably held government secrets or a second identity. In truth, no one knew what was inside it. Forensics teams revisited the room multiple times. The initial sweep had turned up no fingerprints beyond Richard's, the maid's, and a previous guest who had checked out 2 days earlier. No blood, no signs of struggle, no torn fabric, no broken items. Only the untouched bed, the cold coffee, and the journal. The window latch was still locked from the inside. There was no exit. The room had become a sealed chamber, a place where someone had entered but had never left. Then something unexpected surfaced. 3 weeks after the disappearance, a night clerk at a storage facility just 2 miles from the motel reported a break-in. One of the units had been forced open, but nothing was stolen. Instead, something had been left behind. Inside the otherwise empty unit was a single object, a worn, brown leather briefcase with no tag, no initials, and no identifying information. It was locked, but not damaged. Police took possession of it, suspecting a connection. When forensics finally cracked it open, what they found deepened the mystery. Inside were several manila folders, all unmarked except for one labeled in pen, R405. The folder contained old property records, floor plans, and photographs, grainy black and white prints of the motel, some dating back to the 1960s. A few featured the hallway where room 405 would later exist, though back then it had no door. It was simply a solid wall. One photo in particular drew attention. It showed a hallway nearly identical to the one in the present, but where room 405 should have been, there was a maintenance closet. The timestamp on the photo was 1971. In red ink, someone had circled the door and written a single word, "Reopened." Detectives cross-referenced the building's records. That wing of the motel had, in fact, undergone major renovations in 1974 after a series of unexplained complaints. Guests reported missing time, hearing voices, or waking up outside their rooms with no memory of how they got there. Police reports from that time were vague, often attributing the events to stress, alcohol, or drug use. But internal maintenance logs told a different story. Notes about structural changes, unexplained cold spots, and a wall that seemed to shift slightly, as if it were expanding or breathing. Room 405 didn't exist prior to 1975. Before then, that space wasn't listed as rentable. And even when it was added, it was avoided. Staff claimed the room was hard to keep warm. Lights flickered inexplicably. One housekeeper quit after claiming she saw a shadow move behind her reflection in the mirror, except the room had no mirror. Among the papers in the briefcase was a hand-drawn diagram. It depicted a rough floor plan of the motel's top level, with several rooms marked off. Room 405 had been circled multiple times in red. Arrows pointed inward. Next to it, a scrawled note read, "Only opens when it's ready." That line disturbed everyone involved, especially since Richard had written something eerily similar in his journal days before his disappearance. The final item in the briefcase was a cassette tape, unlabeled. When played, it emitted only static for the first few minutes. Then, faintly, a voice could be heard repeating the same phrase in a low whisper. "It comes in silence. It takes what knows." Over and over. No one could identify the voice. It wasn't Richard's. It wasn't anyone on record. Audio analysts suggested the tape had been recorded in a room with minimal acoustic reflection. Small, enclosed, isolated. Possibly room 405 itself. Authorities never found fingerprints on any of the briefcase contents. Nothing could place it definitively in Richard's possession. Yet the folder labeled R405 left little doubt. Someone had tracked the room long before Richard arrived. Someone had studied it, feared it, and perhaps even tried to stop others from entering. But for Richard Hale, it had been too late. The discovery of the briefcase didn't solve the mystery. It expanded it. Whatever happened inside room 405 had happened before, and it was never supposed to happen again. As investigators continued to dig through the records uncovered in the mysterious briefcase, a disturbing pattern began to emerge, one that stretched far beyond the case of Richard Hale. Cross-referencing the names and dates listed in the old property logs revealed a chilling consistency, a series of unsolved disappearances, all centered around the same building, though under different owners and identities across decades. Back in 1964, the building stood as a modest boarding house named the Pines Retreat. During that time, a traveling jazz musician named Elijah Booker vanished after checking into the top floor. According to newspaper archives, Elijah had performed in a nearby lounge the night before. Witnesses confirmed he returned to his room alone. The next morning, his luggage remained, but he didn't. A note had been left behind on the dresser, written in uneven handwriting, "I didn't open the door. It opened for me." No forced entry. No signs of departure. The case remained unsolved. In 1972, the building, then functioning as a temporary halfway home under the name Riverbend Care Units, housed a patient named Thomas Griggs, a war veteran with PTSD. Griggs had been placed on suicide watch after showing signs of delusion and paranoia. One nurse reported he began muttering about the man with the mirror face, who watched from the corners of the ceiling. On the night of October 14th, Thomas was found missing. His bed was still made, shoes still placed neatly by the wall. The only anomaly was a sharp drop in temperature inside his room, so extreme that condensation had formed on the walls. Riverbend shut down within months, citing financial troubles. Later, in the early 80s, during its brief stint as a budget hotel called Restmore Inn, two separate guests, months apart, filed identical complaints about hearing faint knocking behind their walls at night. Both requested room changes. One of them, a salesman named David Morrow, vanished 2 days later. He'd been staying in what would later be renumbered as room 405. Strangely, Each of these incidents occurred in the same physical space, regardless of the room number, name of the building, or business registered at the location. The floor plans matched. The dimensions of the affected rooms remained identical, and in every instance, the surrounding rooms remained undisturbed. It was as if whatever haunted that section of the building had boundaries, fixed and unyielding. Another curious connection came from an interview conducted with a former construction worker who had participated in the 1974 renovation. His name was Harold Dent, now elderly and in assisted living. Through a trembling voice, Harold claimed that during the renovations, workers were instructed to remove a sealed portion of the wall on the upper floor. No one had known it existed. Behind it, they discovered a small, windowless chamber, long forgotten. Inside were decaying remnants of a wooden chair bolted to the floor, a rusted mirror cracked down the middle, and scratch marks on all four walls. The site manager reportedly ordered the rooms sealed again, but not before one of the workers, a man named Julio Ramirez, became erratic. Harold said Julio insisted something inside the mirror was still watching. The very next day, Julio quit without collecting his pay and disappeared from public record. No address. No employment history, as if he had been erased. There was one last clue buried in the building's early 1900s registration records, back when the land was first zoned. It was owned by a man named Bartholomew Cray, a spiritualist who hosted seances and advertised gateways to the beyond. Cray had a reputation in the underground occult community for experimenting with architectural geomancy, believing that certain structures could act as conduits between realms. His writings, scarce but scattered across old journals, referenced a theory he called anchored loci, locations that could act as spiritual magnets if constructed at precise coordinates with specific materials. His last known project before his disappearance in 1913 was a guest house located precisely where the modern-day motel now stands. None of this could be dismissed as coincidence anymore. The briefcase Richard Hale left behind, or perhaps found, wasn't just a collection of papers. It was a timeline, a warning. Every case pointed to the same location, the same room, the same vanishing. Different decades, same outcome. What made room 405 different wasn't simply that Richard vanished. It was that he might have known what was coming. His final journal entries, the markings on the floor plan, and the obsessive documentation all hinted at someone who had unraveled part of the mystery. But why had he gone in anyway? Was it curiosity? Was he trying to stop something from happening again? Or was he drawn to it, like the others before him? With each passing week, the investigation grew colder. Witnesses became harder to reach. The motel eventually shuttered after a steep decline in business. Locals claimed they always felt uneasy about the place, but no one ever spoke up. The building remains abandoned now, rotting slowly under layers of dust and silence. Room 405, sealed with caution tape, waits behind a warped wooden door that no one has dared to open since. Yet, even now, a flicker of something remains in the air, an unresolved hum, a frequency not heard but felt. The kind of feeling that lingers in the bones long after you've left a place. A silent whisper that perhaps Richard Hale didn't vanish. Perhaps he was taken. And maybe, just maybe, room 405 isn't just a room. It's a threshold. The motel stood still, as if frozen in a forgotten dimension where time itself refused to pass. Room 405, once just another doorway along a narrow hallway, had transformed into something else entirely, a symbol of erasure. Not just of one man, but of memory, of presence, of proof. Richard Hale had not only vanished, he had been devoured by the silence that room 405 seemed to feed upon. No news outlets followed up on the case after the first wave of speculative headlines. Businessman vanishes from locked motel room had quickly given way to the next crime, the next scandal, the next tragedy. But in the background, whispers began to circulate among internet forums and message boards that specialized in unsolved mysteries and paranormal events. A small group of amateur researchers began compiling everything they could find: police reports, scanned microfilm, photos of the building, old Yelp reviews, even local folklore. Together, they noticed something everyone else had missed. Room 405 had never been advertised. Archived booking data from the motel's online reservation systems, retrieved through old databases, revealed a missing entry. Rooms 401 through 404 were publicly listed. Room 406 existed too, but 405 had always been marked maintenance use only. So how did Richard Hale end up in that room? And more importantly, why was he allowed in? The working theory that began to surface was disturbing. Some believed the motel staff had been instructed, perhaps by someone higher up, to keep the room unlisted, isolated and inaccessible to the public. It wasn't simply a room that was unlucky or problematic. It was dangerous, and someone had known. Whether management, ownership, or a shadowy figure behind the scenes, someone had made the conscious decision to obscure the existence of 405 while still keeping it intact. Not boarded up, not destroyed, preserved, as if waiting. Those who visited the now-abandoned motel described an overwhelming weight inside the building. A lack of sound, not due to quiet, but due to absence. Like walking into a vacuum where normal acoustics failed. Cell phones malfunctioned. GPS couldn't triangulate. Even compasses spun erratically near the hallway containing 405. Paranormal investigators who snuck in, often under cover of darkness, reported strange phenomena that mirrored the diary entries found in Richard's briefcase. Cold spots that shifted across the room like invisible breath. Sudden nosebleeds. Feelings of being watched. Whispers in foreign tongues. One investigator's camera feed cut out entirely when approaching the door, only to recover as soon as he stepped away. No matter the equipment, nothing could peer past the threshold into 405. It was as if the room rejected documentation. Skeptics dismissed these accounts as urban legend fabrication. They argued that confirmation bias, suggestion, and groupthink explained the fear. But others, particularly those with connections to historical research, pointed to earlier, eerily similar stories from Europe and parts of Asia. Accounts of buildings with missing rooms, corridors that looped back on themselves, and doorways that led nowhere. In nearly all cases, the pattern remained consistent, a room that appeared only to specific individuals, always followed by their disappearance. One chilling observation came from an analyst who processed the CCTV footage from Richard's final night frame by frame. She noticed that, in the moment Richard walked toward room 405, the hallway lighting flickered, not in the typical irregular way, but with mathematical precision. 3 flickers. A pause. Then 5. A deliberate pattern. 3, pause, 5. She claimed it matched a ritualistic number sequence used in ancient architectural numerology tied to threshold rituals, gateways, crossings, and disappearances. There was growing suspicion that Richard hadn't stumbled upon the room by mistake. His background as a risk auditor specializing in real estate had brought him to the city under the guise of evaluating outdated properties for potential demolition. But no records linked him to the motel in an official capacity. His appearance there wasn't part of his work itinerary. In fact, none of his associates even knew he had checked in. This raised one haunting possibility, that Richard had been investigating room 405 on purpose. That he had been following the thread long before arriving at the motel. That the briefcase wasn't something he found there, but something he brought, filled with what he had already uncovered. He might have been documenting a long-forgotten phenomenon, attempting to trace its origins, and room 405 was merely the final stop. If true, it reframed the meaning behind the diary note he left behind, "He's already here." Not a panic-stricken last word, but a realization. A confirmation. An arrival. The "he" in question remained ambiguous. Some believed it was a metaphysical entity, a guardian or gatekeeper bound to room 405. Others suspected it was a past version of Richard himself, or something that had followed him through history, through lifetimes, through architecture. An echo of himself. A presence waiting to complete a loop. Regardless of the theory, one truth stood unshaken. Since Richard's disappearance, no one else had entered room 405 and returned. The motel had since been cordoned off by the county, declared structurally unsound. But people still came. Paranormal thrill seekers, historians, the curious. And though they all tried, none could open the door. As of now, room 405 remains locked. But the silence continues to grow. After years of neglect, the motel decayed into a hollow shell, weathered by storms and forgotten by time. Vines crawled along the outer walls, and boards covered broken windows, yet the doorway to room 405 remained untouched, never vandalized, never forced open, as if protected by an unseen barrier. Local officials claimed the building was condemned for safety reasons, but even demolition crews refused to work near the fourth floor. Every scheduled attempt to tear down the structure had been mysteriously delayed or cancelled. Workers reported inexplicable equipment failure, illnesses, or disturbing dreams days before scheduled demolition. Eventually, no contractor would take the job. The room developed a reputation beyond urban legends. It became a focal point in underground communities dedicated to architectural anomalies and liminal horror. A thread on an obscure message board gained traction when a user claiming to be a former employee at the motel revealed that room 405 had once been sealed for over a decade. According to his testimony, it was never supposed to be opened again. A new manager, unaware of its history, had mistakenly released it into the active booking system during a software update. That update occurred 2 weeks before Richard Hale checked in. The thread included partial floor plans showing the room's position in the building. Curiously, when compared to the original architectural blueprints from the 1960s, room 405 didn't exist. The space between room 404 and 406 was marked as a maintenance shaft, just 5 feet wide. But photos from later years clearly showed a full-size door with the number 405. Researchers who examined this discrepancy concluded that the room was never part of the original layout. It had appeared later, somehow added without construction permits, records, or explanation. A room built where there was no space. More unsettling was the pattern of disappearances associated with the site, long before Richard Hale. Archived police records uncovered 3 unexplained cases between 1984 and 1991 involving individuals last seen in the motel. Each case mentioned the same details: guest checked in alone, luggage left behind, no sign of struggle, no body ever found. One report noted that the cleaning staff avoided a particular room because it made them feel sick. The room number had been redacted. A journalist obsessed with the case traced the motel's ownership history. It led to a shell company based in Nevada, which folded the year after Richard's disappearance. The paper trail ended in a dead zone of offshore accounts and legal smokescreens. No single individual or group could be held accountable for the property, and no one stepped forward to claim responsibility. It was as if the building had been orphaned by design, left to rot under the weight of secrets no one wanted to claim. As the years passed, online fascination with room 405 grew. Explorers, researchers, and self-proclaimed spiritualists uploaded audio recordings, EMF readings, and blurry photographs taken from the hallway outside the room. All documented the same phenomenon: static-laced interference, equipment malfunction, and in one case, a faint rhythmic sound captured on tape, repeating every 21 seconds. Some believed it was breathing. Others argued it resembled the ticking of a clock. No one could explain why the sound never matched real-time recordings or why it only appeared when directed at the door. One final theory emerged from an anonymous physicist who stumbled upon the story in a late-night forum. He proposed a model in which room 405 represented a spatial anomaly, a rupture in architecture caused by temporal displacement. According to him, buildings, like people, can sometimes develop scars, especially those situated on land with traumatic history. These scars can manifest as rooms that don't belong, portals not to other places, but to other times. He posited that room 405 might be a fracture point in space-time, absorbing individuals who enter and displacing them beyond measurable dimensions. His theory never gained mainstream attention, but among the niche community studying the room, it became doctrine. Despite all the investigations, hypotheses, and experiments, no one had ever entered room 405 and come back. The door remained stubbornly locked, immune to bolt cutters, crowbars, and even lockpicking tools. It didn't appear welded shut. It didn't look reinforced. It simply refused. The key that opened it, if it ever existed, was never recovered. Some believed Richard Hale had it. Others believed the room itself was sentient, choosing who it allowed inside. And yet, even now, the door waits. Tourists still come. Some take photos, some press their ears to the cold wood, others leave offerings, flowers, notes, even small clocks stopped at 3:05 a.m., the time Richard was last seen on camera. Children dare each other to knock. Most don't. Those who do report strange dreams the following nights, dreams of standing in unfamiliar rooms with identical doors, always slightly ajar, always whispering in voices that sound almost like their own. It's unclear whether room 405 was ever meant to exist, or if it is a living reminder of something older than logic, older than architecture. But the door stands, untouched by weather, rot, or time. Behind it may lie a man's final moments, a dimension folded in silence, or nothing at all. Whatever the truth, it has never stopped waiting. And one day, someone else will open it. End of Story 1. Story 2. In 1974, 3 experienced hikers ventured deep into a remote forest in Oregon, never to return alive. Their bodies were discovered days later, brutally murdered inside their tent, yet there were no signs of forced entry. The tent was unzipped from the inside. Nearby, a cassette tape was found containing an eerie whisper. I followed them for hours. No fingerprints. No footprints. No suspects. Just whispers in the woods. And to this day, the locals swear the forest still echoes with their dying screams. In the summer of 1974, 3 friends set out for what was supposed to be a routine hiking trip in the remote wilderness of Sable Pines Forest, a stretch of dense, ancient trees tucked away in the Pacific Northwest. Michael, Travis, and Joel were all experienced outdoorsmen, each with years of hiking and camping under their belts. Their bond was forged through countless expeditions, and their shared love for the wild was well known among their peers. The plan was simple: spend 5 days trekking deep into the forest, camping under the stars, and returning home before the end of the week. Sable Pines was not a forest for the faint of heart. It was known for its thick undergrowth, jagged rock formations, and eerie stillness that seemed to absorb sound itself. Though maps marked trails and campsites, many locals avoided the area, sharing stories of lost travelers and strange disappearances that seemed to happen without pattern or explanation. The forest had an aura of something ancient and watchful, a place where people came and some never left. Michael, Travis, and Joel packed their gear meticulously, everything from food supplies to first aid kits, rope, and navigation tools. They laughed about the ghost stories, dismissing them as superstition and local folklore. In their minds, Sable Pines was simply a challenging landscape, and they were more than capable of conquering it. The last confirmed contact was a phone call from Michael to his sister 2 days into the hike. His voice was calm and confident, describing their route and the beauty around them. He mentioned an upcoming campsite near the banks of a quiet creek, promising to call again in a few days. But that call never came. As the days passed without any word, friends and family began to worry. After 5 days with no sign, a search was organized, involving local law enforcement and volunteers familiar with the terrain. The searchers combed the trails, scanning the dense foliage, but found nothing for nearly a week. Then, deep within the forest, their worst fears were confirmed. The trio's campsite was found exactly where Michael had described, but what the search team discovered there defied explanation. The tent was intact, standing as if the hikers had just stepped away, yet its zipper was undone from the inside. No signs of forced entry or damage. The campfire was cold, and the belongings untouched. But the 3 friends were nowhere to be found. What made the discovery more chilling were the signs around the campsite. There was no blood, no footprints leading away, no indication of struggle or panic. The tent's interior showed no evidence that anyone had exited under duress. And yet, Michael, Travis, and Joel were gone. A day after finding the tent, search teams discovered the hikers' bodies not far from the site. The 3 were lying face down beneath a thicket of pines, their clothing torn but without defensive wounds. Their bodies bore strange cuts, clean and precise, but nothing that matched typical weapons. The wounds suggested a cold, deliberate act, but with no murder weapon found. The silence in the forest was deafening. The coroner's report puzzled investigators. There were no signs of toxic substances or natural causes. The wounds were sufficient to cause death, but forensic experts could not identify what had inflicted them. What confounded everyone was the lack of evidence around the bodies. No drag marks, no disturbed vegetation, no signs of a chase or altercation. Among the hikers' belongings, a cassette recorder was found near the campsite, half buried beneath a layer of leaves and moss. When played, the tape revealed only faint whispers, interspersed with what sounded like footsteps, rustling leaves, and distant breathing. The most distinct phrase repeated over and over was chilling, "I followed them for hours." The voice was soft but clearly deliberate, almost taunting. Despite technological efforts, the voice on the tape could not be matched to any known person, and no background noise offered clues to the speaker's location. The tape became a haunting puzzle, a message from an unknown watcher hidden within the forest's depths. Local law enforcement struggled to find leads. The investigation brought them into contact with Sable Pines residents and frequent visitors, but no one reported suspicious activity during the days the hikers vanished. The forest's reputation only grew, with whispered warnings of the watcher in the trees that no one could see, but everyone feared. The disappearance and murder of Michael, Travis, and Joel remain a cold case. Official files contain fragments of information, evidence sealed away, reports filed but never solved. The tape was archived, its contents analyzed multiple times but never fully understood. Detectives and search parties have long since retired, but the story has never left the minds of those who knew the hikers or ventured near Sable Pines. The forest itself seems to hold its secrets tight, an unyielding silence guarding the truth behind the hikers' fate. To this day, hikers who pass through the area speak of sudden chills, unexplained noises, and the faint feeling of being watched. Some swear they hear faint whispers on the wind, voices calling from deep within the pines, begging for help or warning others to turn back. The whispering forest murders remain one of the most baffling mysteries of the Pacific Northwest. It is a story not just of tragic loss, but of something unseen, something that lingers in the shadows, waiting and watching. A place where even the bravest souls feel the weight of unseen eyes, and where the forest itself seems to whisper the names of those it keeps. When the search teams finally found the campsite of Michael, Travis, and Joel, the eerie nature of the discovery sent shockwaves through investigators and locals alike. The tent stood undisturbed among the thick underbrush, zipped open from the inside as if inviting the friends to return at any moment. Everything at the site was in near-perfect order, backpacks neatly placed, cooking supplies untouched, and personal items exactly where the hikers had left them. There was no evidence of a struggle or panic. No overturned gear, no torn fabric, no discarded items to suggest a hurried escape. It was as if the three had vanished into thin air. This unsettling scene was the first puzzle piece in a mystery that defied explanation. The tent's zipper had been opened from within, and yet the three hikers were nowhere inside or nearby. The zipper mechanism itself showed no signs of damage or tampering, which would usually be expected if someone had forcibly exited or been dragged out. But without a trace of forced entry or disturbance, the natural assumption that the trio had simply left voluntarily was contradicted by their sudden disappearance. Despite the seemingly peaceful campsite, the search did not end there. Investigators combed the surrounding area and soon discovered the bodies of the three men a short distance away. They lay prone beneath dense foliage, their lifeless forms blending into the forest floor. The state of the bodies further deepened the mystery. Each man's body bore precise, clean cuts, too deliberate and systematic to be caused by wild animals or accidental injuries. The wounds indicated a calculated attack, yet no weapon was ever recovered. There was no blood trail leading to or from the site that could suggest a violent struggle or chase. This absence of typical crime scene evidence baffled forensic teams. How could three men be killed without leaving clear physical evidence of their attacker? The condition of the bodies also confused medical examiners. There were no signs of defensive wounds, no bruising from hand-to-hand combat. The injuries were focused and methodical, suggesting the victims may have been incapacitated or caught unaware. Autopsy reports showed no toxins, poisons, or diseases that could explain sudden death. It was clear these were murders, but the method and motive remained elusive. Perhaps most baffling was the complete lack of external clues. Footprints leading away from the bodies were absent. No tire tracks, no human or animal prints disturbed the soil or leaf litter around the scene. The surrounding undergrowth was unnaturally undisturbed for a crime of this magnitude, as if nature itself had been held at bay. At the campsite, investigators found something that seemed almost out of place: a cassette tape recorder, partially concealed under fallen leaves and pine needles. The recorder was a common model for the era, but showed signs of weather exposure. When examined, the tape inside contained faint audio recordings that would become one of the most haunting elements of the entire case. The audio was eerie, soft whispers intermingled with background noises that suggested movement through the forest, rustling leaves, distant footsteps, and an occasional faint breath. Among the whispers, one phrase was repeatedly discernible: "I followed them for hours." The voice was barely audible but distinctly human, yet none of the investigators could identify the speaker. Audio specialists who analyzed the tape found no indication that the recording was altered or staged. The ambient sounds matched the environment of Sable Pines Forest, yet no definitive clues could be drawn about who recorded it or why. The voice did not match any known samples from the victims or people involved in the search, leaving it a chilling enigma. Locals familiar with the forest offered theories steeped in folklore. Some claimed the whispering was the voice of the Watcher, a mysterious entity said to observe travelers but never interact directly. Others believed it was a warning from the spirits of previous victims, bound to the forest and unable to move on. The tape became a symbol of the forest's dark secret, a tangible connection to a threat that had never been identified. Law enforcement officials struggled to connect any dots. The remote location limited witness availability, and the lack of physical evidence hindered traditional investigative methods. They interviewed local hunters, campers, and forest rangers, but no one reported seeing suspicious activity or strangers in the area around the time of the disappearance. The case file was filled with frustrating dead ends. Lead investigators expressed growing unease as the forensic anomalies piled up. The absence of a murder weapon, the lack of blood trails, and the presence of the mysterious cassette tape fueled speculation about an unknown assailant, or possibly something not human. Some officers reported odd experiences during the investigation: equipment malfunctions, unexplained noises in the night, and a pervasive sense of being watched. Whether these reports were psychological effects of the haunting case or something more supernatural remained unclear, but they added to the growing mythos surrounding the forest. Media attention was intense but short-lived. Sensational headlines questioned whether the hikers had been victims of a serial killer, a cult ritual, or an animal attack. Yet none of these theories fit the facts. The public's fascination was tinged with fear, as the whispers and shadows of Sable Pines took on a life of their own in local consciousness. Years later, the campsite and bodies locations became places few dared to visit. Signs warned hikers to avoid the area, and some trails were closed due to unexplained disappearances over subsequent decades. The forest's reputation as a dangerous, haunted place was cemented. Despite ongoing efforts, no suspect was ever identified. The case remains open but cold, archived alongside countless other unresolved disappearances that plagued the Pacific Northwest. The mysterious cassette tape remains locked away in evidence storage, a haunting artifact that offers no answers but only questions. The discovery of the hikers, their tent, and the chilling audio recordings stand as the pillars of one of the most perplexing and unsettling true crime mysteries in recent American history. A case that blends elements of the inexplicable with the grim reality of murder. A case where the forest itself seems to guard its secrets with a whisper and a shadow. The Whispering Forest murders have perplexed investigators and true crime enthusiasts for decades. The combination of the gruesome triple homicide, the intact campsite, and the mysterious cassette recording has given rise to numerous theories and speculations. None have been confirmed, yet each offers a glimpse into possible explanations for what truly happened deep within the remote forest in 1974. One of the earliest and most widely discussed theories is the involvement of a serial killer or a violent predator. The precision of the wounds and the lack of defensive injuries suggest an experienced attacker. The possibility of a skilled killer lurking in the dense forest, using it as a hunting ground, was a logical hypothesis. This theory was supported by the fact that the tent was zipped from inside, implying that the victims may have felt safe before being attacked, perhaps betrayed by someone they knew or someone who managed to get close without alarming them. However, this theory faltered under scrutiny. No suspects with a known history of violence were linked to the area during that time. More importantly, no physical evidence such as footprints, DNA, or weapons were found. Serial killers usually leave some trace, and the meticulous cleanup or absence of traces suggested a different kind of attacker, one with a methodical and possibly unusual modus operandi. Another theory that captured public imagination was that of a cult-related ritual murder. The 1970s were rife with reports of secretive groups engaging in bizarre practices, especially in rural or forested areas. The fact that the victims were found with no apparent motive or robbery, combined with the strange whispering on the cassette, led some to suspect a ritualistic element. The phrase, "I followed them for hours," was interpreted by some as the chant or mantra of a cult member stalking their prey. Yet, despite this speculation, investigators found no direct evidence of cult activity in the area. There were no symbols, paraphernalia, or signs that typically accompany ritualistic crimes. The case files contained nothing linking the hikers to any fringe groups or controversial gatherings. The local population, though superstitious, had no reports of cult presence, and police investigations into known groups found no connection. This theory remained tantalizing but unproven. A more psychological theory suggested the possibility of paranoia or hallucination leading to a tragic accident. Some speculated that one or more of the hikers could have suffered a mental breakdown, perhaps triggered by isolation or stress. They might have attacked their friends or fled into the forest, leading to fatal consequences. The whispering on the tape was theorized to be a self-recorded confession or a fragmented memory. This idea had some grounding in forensic psychology, but it failed to explain the nature of the wounds and the absence of typical signs of violent struggle. Also, the tape's quality and timing did not match the idea of a desperate confession. The fact that all three men were victims rules out a lone assailant scenario, making this hypothesis less likely. A popular supernatural theory emerged from local legends and folklore surrounding the forest. Residents spoke of the Watcher, an unseen presence said to haunt the trees, capable of manipulating reality and preying on those who dared enter. The faint screams heard by hikers years after the murders and the whispering on the cassette were often cited as proof of this entity's existence. Supernatural explanations, while unprovable and dismissed by official investigators, have persisted in popular culture and among locals. The forest became a symbol of the unknown, a place where human logic failed, and where dark forces were believed to be at play. This theory found expression in numerous books, podcasts, and documentaries, contributing to the case's enduring mystique. Some researchers proposed that the cassette tape itself was the key to understanding the mystery. The recording was seen as a message from the perpetrator or even the victims themselves. Audio experts who examined the tape found subtle irregularities, background noises, and whisper patterns that some interpreted as coded communication or a cry for help. This led to an entire subculture of tape hunters and paranormal enthusiasts who attempted to decode the whispers using audio enhancement and spectrogram analysis. Some claimed to hear names, locations, or warnings hidden in the static. None of these claims have been scientifically validated, but they added another layer of complexity to the case. A more pragmatic explanation pointed to environmental dangers as a contributing factor. The forest was known for its rugged terrain, unpredictable weather, and dangerous wildlife. The theory posited that the men may have been attacked by a wild animal or caught in a natural hazard, with the wounds caused post-mortem or by scavengers. However, this did not account for the precision of the wounds or the fact that the tent was closed and intact. Animal attacks usually leave a chaotic scene with scattered remains and evidence of struggle, none of which was observed. Additionally, The audio tape's whispering remained unexplained by natural causes. In the years following the murders, a few confessions surfaced, though none were credible or led to any breakthroughs. Some individuals sought notoriety by claiming responsibility, but investigations always disproved their involvement. These false confessions only added frustration and confusion to an already complex case. The lack of closure has left families and the public with many unanswered questions. Why were the men followed? Who or what caused their deaths? And what exactly was recorded on the tape? Each theory attempts to explain different aspects of the case, but no single explanation satisfies all the evidence. The Whispering Forest murders remain an unsolved enigma, blending elements of human violence, psychological horror, and unexplained phenomena. The interplay of facts, folklore, and speculation has created a case that challenges conventional understanding of crime and mystery. As technology advances, some investigators hope that new forensic methods, such as DNA analysis on preserved evidence or enhanced audio forensics, might one day shed light on the truth. Until then, the theories and speculations continue to fuel fascination and fear, ensuring that the dark whispers of the forest never fade from memory. After the initial shock of the discovery, investigators turned their attention to the forensic examination of the victims and the crime scene. The autopsy reports revealed chilling details that complicated the investigation further. Each hiker had suffered fatal wounds consistent with a sharp instrument, but the nature of these injuries was unusual. The cuts were precise and targeted, almost surgical in their execution, suggesting the attacker had significant knowledge of anatomy or combat. The absence of defensive wounds on the victims was particularly puzzling. Normally, when someone is attacked, there are signs of resistance: bruises, scratches, broken fingernails. Here, the lack of such evidence suggested the victims either did not see the attack coming or were incapacitated in some way before the assault began. Toxicology reports showed no traces of sedatives or toxins, ruling out poisoning or drugging as methods to disable them. Further complicating matters was the state of the tent. Despite the brutality of the murders, the tent was zipped closed from the inside, as if the victims had willingly allowed the killer inside or had been unaware of the danger until it was too late. The zipper showed no signs of forced entry or tampering. Investigators speculated whether the attacker had been someone familiar to the victims, someone they trusted enough to let into their confined space. The cassette tape found near the site became a crucial piece of evidence. Audio experts spent weeks analyzing the recording, attempting to isolate the whispering and any background sounds. The whispers were faint, almost indecipherable, but certain phrases stood out repeatedly, such as "I followed them" and "not yet." The source of the whispering voice was never identified, adding to the eerie mystery. There was also subtle ambient noise in the background: wind rustling through leaves, distant bird calls, and an intermittent mechanical sound that resembled footsteps on dry leaves. Investigators theorized the tape was either a recording made by the perpetrator or a device left behind accidentally during the attack. The possibility of a hidden recorder being used to stalk the victims was considered but never confirmed. No similar tapes or devices were found during the search, which expanded over several square miles. One perplexing aspect was the absence of footprints or any tracks leading away from the tent. The ground around the campsite was soft and would have captured any disturbance, but investigators found nothing. The lack of escape routes for the killer raised the question: had the murderer vanished into thin air, or was there another explanation for the missing footprints? This detail fueled theories about a non-human or supernatural presence, but forensic specialists maintained their focus on rational explanations. Some posited that the killer might have used a clever technique to avoid leaving tracks, such as stepping on rocks or branches, or that they escaped before the campsite became visible to the search team. However, the area was thoroughly searched multiple times with no evidence of human passage. The investigation also took into account the psychological profiles of the victims. All three hikers were experienced outdoorsmen with extensive knowledge of survival and self-defense. They were unlikely to be caught off guard easily. This fact led investigators to suspect that the attacker might have been exceptionally skilled or that the victims were compromised in a way that lowered their defenses. Interviews with friends and family revealed that the hikers had no known enemies or conflicts. There were no indications of threats or harassment prior to their trip. Their decision to hike in the remote forest was typical of their adventurous spirits, with no sign they anticipated danger. Local authorities faced challenges in managing the case due to limited resources and the remote location. The initial response was delayed because the campsite was not on any established trail, and the hikers had not checked in with park officials. By the time their disappearance was reported, valuable time had passed, possibly allowing critical evidence to degrade or vanish. Over the following months, police conducted extensive searches and canvassed nearby towns for any suspicious activity. Tips and leads were followed, but none resulted in arrests or breakthroughs. The case was officially classified as unsolved, and the files remained open for years. In parallel, a public fascination with the case grew. Media coverage brought attention to the mystery, and conspiracy theories proliferated. Some speculated about government involvement or secret experiments conducted in the forest, pointing to the unexplained mechanical sounds on the tape as evidence. Others believed the forest was home to a serial predator who had evaded capture for decades. Despite the sensationalism, the core facts of the case remained hauntingly straightforward. 3 hikers dead under inexplicable circumstances, a tent zipped from the inside, and a whispering voice captured on a tape that offered no answers. The psychological toll on the families was immense. Not knowing who or what had killed their loved ones left a void that official investigations could not fill. Some family members continued their own inquiries, seeking closure through personal research and interviews with locals who had knowledge of the forest's history. The forest itself gained a reputation as a place of danger and mystery. Hikers reported feeling watched or hearing unexplained sounds. Some refused to enter the woods altogether, fearing the same fate as the 3 men. Others were drawn by curiosity, hoping to unravel the secret behind the murders. Over time, law enforcement agencies revisited the case as forensic technologies advanced. DNA analysis was performed on preserved samples, but no new matches were found. Audio forensics experts applied modern techniques to the cassette recording, attempting to enhance the whispering and detect hidden signals. These efforts yielded intriguing but inconclusive results. The combination of physical evidence, psychological profiles, and environmental factors made the Whispering Forest murders a unique and difficult case. The contradictions, the tent zipped from the inside versus the violent deaths, the absence of footprints despite an active attacker, the whispering tape with its mysterious message, all contributed to an enduring enigma. Today, the case stands as a chilling reminder of how some mysteries resist explanation. It challenges assumptions about crime scene behavior and human nature, and it forces investigators and the public alike to confront the limits of knowledge and the presence of the unknown. The forest remains silent but ever watchful, its whispers a lasting echo of a terrible night that continues to haunt those who remember. The aftermath of the Whispering Forest murders sent ripples far beyond the immediate tragedy. The unresolved nature of the case fostered a persistent unease that gripped both the local community and those who followed the story from afar. Over time, the forest became more than just a crime scene. It transformed into a symbol of fear, mystery, and the unknown. Despite the lack of physical evidence leading to the perpetrator, investigators continued to explore every possible angle. The precision of the wounds suggested a calculated and experienced attacker, someone who understood not only anatomy but also how to strike efficiently without leaving a trace. This raised the question: was the killer a professional, perhaps a hitman, or someone with a military or medical background? The profiles of known offenders were scrutinized, but no clear suspect matched the unique characteristics of the crime. The closed tent added another layer of complexity. It contradicted typical crime patterns. Usually, in violent attacks, the scene shows signs of struggle or forced entry, but here the killer appeared to have gained access without alarming the victims or forcing their way in. This opened the door to several theories. One possibility was that the victims knew the killer and willingly let them inside, perhaps believing they posed no threat. Another theory suggested a form of psychological manipulation or coercion, where the victims were deceived into opening the tent zipper themselves. The mysterious cassette tape found near the site became a source of endless speculation. The whispers it contained were disturbing and cryptic, sounding as if the speaker was stalking or hunting the victims. Could the tape have been left intentionally as a message or warning? Or was it an accidental recording of the killer's obsession? Experts worked tirelessly to analyze the audio, but the source of the whispers was never identified, nor was the recording traced to any known device or manufacturer. Local folklore began to intertwine with the facts, as stories of the forest's dark past emerged. Some residents spoke of strange disappearances dating back decades, long before the hikers' deaths. Tales of mysterious figures lurking among the trees, eerie sounds at night, and ghostly apparitions gained traction. The forest was no longer just a remote wilderness. It became a haunted place in the minds of many. These legends influenced public perception and complicated the investigation. Police had to contend not only with the physical challenges of searching dense woods, but also with managing community fears and rumors. Patrols were increased in the area, and warnings issued to hikers, but the forest's reputation deterred many from entering altogether. This made gathering new evidence or eyewitness accounts increasingly difficult. The psychological impact on the families of the victims was profound and enduring. Without answers, the pain of loss was compounded by uncertainty. Family members struggled with the void left by unanswered questions, and many found themselves trapped in an agonizing limbo. Support groups and counseling services were established, but nothing could replace the closure that a solved case might have provided. The victims' friends and relatives often revisited the last known moments of a hiker's trip, searching for clues in their communications and plans. Emails, phone calls, and journal entries were scrutinized for hints of trouble or conflict. Yet, nothing suggested they anticipated danger or had reason to fear the forest. Their trip was supposed to be an adventure, a temporary escape into nature, not a fatal mistake. Over the years, the case attracted attention from amateur investigators, true crime enthusiasts, and paranormal investigators alike. Some brought new perspectives and fresh eyes, proposing theories ranging from cult activity to secret government experiments. Others explored the supernatural, suggesting that the forest itself might be alive with malevolent forces that prey on the unwary. Despite the wide range of theories, no credible evidence ever surfaced to confirm any of these claims. The official position remained that the murders were the work of a human perpetrator, but one who had managed to elude detection completely. The forest's ecology and geography were also studied in connection with the murders. The dense canopy, uneven terrain, and remote location made it an ideal place for someone seeking to hide or evade capture. Wildlife in the area, including bears and wolves, complicated search efforts, as tracks and signs could be easily mistaken or obscured. This environment offered the killer natural advantages, allowing for stealth and quick escape routes inaccessible to law enforcement vehicles or equipment. The Whispering Forest murders also influenced local policy and safety regulations. Authorities implemented stricter requirements for hikers to register their trips, introduced check-in points, and increased ranger patrols during peak seasons. Educational campaigns warned visitors about the dangers of traveling alone or in small groups and emphasized the importance of communication devices and survival gear. Despite these measures, the forest retained its aura of danger and mystery. It became a site for thrill seekers and paranormal tourists, drawn by the unsolved case and the eerie legends. This influx of visitors sometimes clashed with conservation efforts and the desire of locals to preserve the forest's natural state. In popular culture, the case inspired books, documentaries, and podcasts. Writers and filmmakers used the Whispering Forest murders as a foundation for fictional stories, blending fact and fiction to heighten suspense and explore the psychological aspects of fear and the unknown. These portrayals varied from respectful tributes to sensationalized horror, but all contributed to keeping the story alive in public consciousness. Law enforcement periodically reopened the case with advances in technology. New forensic methods such as DNA sequencing and digital audio enhancement were applied to the existing evidence. These efforts occasionally generated leads, but never enough to close the investigation. Cold case units worked tirelessly to cross-reference missing persons databases and criminal records, hoping to find connections that might have been overlooked. The case also highlighted the limitations of forensic science in certain environments. The passage of time, exposure to elements, and lack of physical clues challenged even the most advanced techniques. It underscored the importance of initial response and scene preservation, which in remote locations can be compromised by natural factors and delayed discovery. Years after the murders, the forest remains a place where silence speaks louder than words. The faint screams that locals claim to hear at night continue to fuel the imagination and haunt those who dare to listen. The story of the Whispering Forest murders serves as a stark reminder of human vulnerability and the enduring mysteries hidden in the depths of nature. The victims, though long gone, have not been forgotten. Their disappearance is a lingering question mark, a dark chapter in the history of the forest that refuses to close. The quest for answers continues, driven by the hope that someday the whispers will be understood and justice will finally be served. The years passed, but the Whispering Forest murders remained shrouded in mystery, an unsolved enigma that haunted investigators, families, and locals alike. Over time, the case developed a reputation as one of the most baffling and chilling unsolved crimes in the region's history. It became a symbol of how even the most thorough investigations can falter when faced with the unknown. New developments in forensic science brought hope to some that the case might one day be cracked. Techniques such as advanced DNA analysis, digital enhancement of audio recordings, and geographic profiling offered tools unavailable to the original investigators. Law enforcement agencies revisited the physical evidence, however limited it was, with renewed vigor. The cassette tape's whispering audio was carefully re-examined using state-of-the-art sound isolation and voice analysis technologies, but the source remained elusive, evading identification. Despite these efforts, no definitive breakthrough occurred. The passage of time worked both for and against the case. On one hand, memories faded and physical evidence degraded. On the other, the development of cold case units dedicated to using modern methods to solve old crimes allowed the case to stay active in the criminal justice system, rather than fading into obscurity. The families of the three hikers never gave up hope. They became advocates for continued investigation, pressing authorities to keep the case open and to not let their loved ones be forgotten. Annual memorials were held near the forest's edge, where friends and family gathered to remember the victims and demand justice. Their perseverance kept public attention alive, preventing the case from slipping entirely into the realm of forgotten tragedies. The forest itself took on a near-mythical status among those who lived nearby. Stories of whispered voices, fleeting shadows, and inexplicable cold spots became part of local lore. Tourists and thrill-seekers visited with flashlights and recording equipment, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. Some claimed to hear the faint echoes of the victims' screams or the unsettling whispers from the infamous cassette tape. Skeptics dismissed such claims as psychological effects, pareidolia, suggestibility, and mass hysteria fueled by the tragic story and the eerie environment. But others believed the forest was somehow a place where reality bent, where spirits lingered, trapped between worlds, or where an unseen presence still watched and waited. Theories about the identity of the murderer evolved with time. Some speculated about a serial killer who used the forest as a hunting ground, someone skilled in evading capture by exploiting the remote terrain. Others suggested cult involvement or ritualistic killings, fueled by the oddness of the sealed tent and the whispered message on the tape. These theories, however, lacked hard evidence and were often considered speculative. Psychologists and criminal profilers studied the case to understand the mindset of the killer. The calculated method of murder, the silence of the victims, and the deliberate leaving of the tape suggested a perpetrator who wanted control, who derived satisfaction from creating fear and confusion. Yet, this chilling insight into the killer's psychology was no closer to identifying them than the forensic clues. The local community wrestled with its collective trauma. The forest was once a place of beauty and recreation, but became synonymous with danger and loss. Efforts to reclaim the forest as a safe public space faced resistance from those who remembered the horrors too well. Some called for permanent closure, others for increased security measures. Media coverage over the years fueled both interest and misinformation. Sensationalist reporting sometimes overshadowed facts, focusing on horror elements or supernatural speculation rather than investigative details. Documentaries, podcasts, and books dedicated to the case reached wide audiences, keeping the story alive but also creating myths that obscured reality. The police department, aware of the public pressure and the case's high profile, periodically released updates or reopened inquiries when new information surfaced. Yet each lead seemed to circle back to dead ends, reinforcing the notion that the killer was either extraordinarily careful or that some crucial piece of evidence had been lost forever. The victims' stories became a focal point for remembrance rather than just tragedy. Their passions, personalities, and plans were remembered through interviews, personal writings, and memories shared by loved ones. The narrative shifted subtly from the fear surrounding their deaths to honoring their lives, hopes, and dreams cut short. Among the lasting legacies of the Whispering Forest murders was a heightened awareness of wilderness safety. Hiking groups developed protocols to avoid isolation, encourage communication, and carry emergency devices. The forest's mysteries underscored the unpredictable dangers of venturing into remote areas without adequate precautions. In the digital age, the case also found a new audience online. Forums, social media groups, and true crime communities debated theories, shared findings, and sometimes reported supposed new evidence. This democratization of investigation created a unique dynamic, crowdsourcing information, but also occasionally spreading misinformation or conspiracy theories. As decades passed, the case became a cautionary tale, a chilling reminder of how some mysteries remain unresolved and how the human cost of violence echoes long after the crime itself. The Whispering Forest murders are a testament to the fragility of life and the dark unknowns that can lurk in even the most peaceful places. Despite the frustration and heartbreak, the hope persists. The quest for truth, driven by love, justice, and the relentless human spirit, endures. The forest holds its secrets tightly, but those who seek answers continue to listen carefully to its whispers, believing that one day the silence will break and the mystery will finally be solved. The end. The Whispering Forest murders remain one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries. 3 hikers vanished in a place meant for peace, and despite decades of investigation, the truth still hides in the shadows of that forest. The cryptic message on the cassette tape and the sealed tent leave us with more questions than answers. Who was watching them? Why did the killer leave such a haunting clue? These questions keep the story alive in our minds. For the families, the pain of not knowing is still fresh. Their hope for justice reminds us how important it is to remember those lost, not just as victims, but as real people with stories. If this story moved you, please like and share the video with anyone interested in true crime mysteries. Your support helps us bring more unsolved cases and eerie stories to light. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon so you never miss a new video. We'll continue exploring strange disappearances, unsolved crimes, and the dark secrets of forgotten places. If you have any thoughts or theories about the Whispering Forest murders, drop a comment below. Sometimes a fresh perspective can bring new hope. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay curious, and keep listening to the whispers of the past.